Hello again, my name's Scott Arthur and I'm the lecturer for the course called Urban Drainage and Water Supply D21UD. This video lecture is for part 1 of class 1, so it's kind of a brief introduction which goes over some of the key themes. The second part also forms an introduction, but it goes over things in a little bit more detail. There's some parts of this lecture are in the second part and vice versa, but there is a fair bit of overlap. I guess this first part of the course is really to help people decide whether or not this is the right course for them and whether or not it's going to give them what they want in terms of their future careers. Whereas the next introductory part is much more of an overview of the course as a whole and talks much more about the kind of issues we'll be thinking about and the kind of mindset we're looking for from the people who complete the course. So for on-campus students, there'll be a lecture every week, which you're expected to attend. For IDL students, I'll be posting these videos online. Obviously, on-campus students are free to look at these videos as well. Students where you're on campus or IDL, you're free to contact me outside class time, either in person, and I appreciate that's easier for on-campus students, or by phone, Skype or email. If you're going to speak to me outside class time, the best bet is to set up some sort of appointment so we can both set aside the time needed to speak about whatever your issue is, and I'll try and help you the best I can. So where are we? So this slide is really just to kind of an overview of what the course as a whole is about. So over the next 12 weeks or so, we'll look at the rainfall runoff transformation process in urban catchments. So that's about how we estimate how much rainfall falls in a catchment, and then the processes involved in converting that rainfall to runoff and the things which influence that process. Look at the impact of that runoff in terms of flooding and water quality in urban rivers and other receiving waters, and we'll look at how we control those impacts, and in particular we'll look at how we design stormwater drainage systems. And the 12 weeks will end by us looking briefly at water supply systems. So this is a rough layout for the course, and here we are in week 1, and this is introduction. So far so good, I guess. And then you'll see the following weeks are laid out before you there. So this will change, so please don't get uptight if things move around a little bit, because I have to adapt to your pace just as much as you have to adapt to my pace. But I'm pretty sure we'll get there in the end, and by week 12 you'll be ready for the exam one way or another. Let's hope. So class 1. So why do we need urban drainage systems? So a simple way of looking at this is in the natural environment, a water cycle exists, and wherever we develop an area, that development interrupts the water cycle. You'll be familiar with the water cycle, where the rain falls from the clouds onto the ground, it runs off and evaporates either from the ground or from watercourses or from the sea, goes back up, new clouds are formed, and this cycle repeats. Whenever we build, that interrupts our processes, both in the immediate way and also because we abstract quite a lot of water from that water cycle to support lives and commercial activity. So we have to think about how we manage that process. So this urban drainage really is about how urban developments interact with that water cycle, and also about how we protect the environment when doing so. Because of urban developments, we have to return that water which we take from the water cycle back to it, and that's either done via wastewater systems, where we collect the water which we use in our houses or commercial properties and return it to the environment via a sewage system and hopefully a sewage treatment works, or the stormwater we collect from roofs, roads, etc., and how we get that back in the environment. So urban drainage is really focused around trying to solve those problems and meet those needs without having too negative an impact on the environment. So what do we expect from urban drainage systems? So this is, in this section in class, what I would normally do is I would show these 3 videos, and really what these videos are about is trying to give you some understanding of, yes, the pipe part of urban drainage system has to convey flows, but it's not quite as simple as that. There's lots of other things going on at the same time. So linked on Vision, next to the this video lecture, there'll be a link to YouTube where I've set up a playlist, I think it's called, which runs you through about half a dozen videos of films inside sewers. Now, you don't have to watch them all, but they're not too long, to be honest. But these 3 are definitely worth watching. So the first one, which is called Sewer Infiltration Robot Camera, it's a little robot going along the sewer, and what it identifies is infiltration coming into the sewer pipe. Now what infiltration is where you've got a hole in the pipe wall, and through that hole groundwater is moving from the surrounding ground into the pipe. And now, so you would say, well, why is that an issue? Well, the reason it's an issue is that even if this water is 100% clean, and often it is water from water supply pipes which are cracked or broken, it's leaking into the ground and it's going into the sewer, that's not unusual. Even though it's 100% clean, it does bring extra volume into the network, and that extra volume means that capacity is being lost, and that makes flood risk, well, raises flood risk basically. Now the other issue that comes with it is quite often in sewage systems you're using pumping equipment to move the water around, so if you've got more water than you expect, your pumping costs are higher than expected and you need more pumps and they're more expensive to maintain. Likewise, your sewage treatment works is designed to cope with a certain volume of inflow, and if you're getting more than expected, that can cause you problems in terms of your processes, or perhaps you need a bigger plant than otherwise needed. So just by those simple leaks, and there is just one in the video, but if you think of a pipeline, the sewer pipe with the infiltration problem there is in Loanhead in Edinburgh. I think it's around 10 kilometres of pipeline which connects Loanhead to the treatment works in Edinburgh. So you think about all the leaks along that pipeline and how all that adds up, it can be quite significant. Okay, so that's the first video. The second video is also from Loanhead, and it's the same, well, it's nearby, and what that shows is a misaligned pipe. So the pipes were laid nicely together, end to end, and then over time one of them's dropped in height. And this is Loanhead, so it's a former mining area, so it may be that drop was due to subsidence due to older mine works, or it may just be that it wasn't laid properly, or due to excess traffic loading, or some of the ground's been washed away because of, like I said earlier, a leaking water main. But for whatever reason these pipes are misaligned. Now that causes a little bit of hydraulic resistance within the pipe, which has to be overcome, but that affects the flow regime. The lip which is caused can also be where material, where sediments or rags, etc., get caught, and that can be the source of a blockage. So that's actually quite a significant issue. But again, for one misaligned pipe in a network which is miles and miles long, you can just shrug your shoulders. But when all these things add up together, the risks of problems start to rise quite substantially. So the last video is from 1992, when I lived in Dundee, and this shows an experiment we ran in Dundee to collect sediments from inside a sewer pipe. So what you'll see in this video is there's an artificial sewer pipe inside a proper sewer pipe, and on the base of the artificial pipe there's traps, and these traps collect the material which is moving along the bottom of the pipe. Now in this pipe the flow velocity was relatively slow at this part, so we do collect quite a lot of material which has low specific gravity, low density, so quite a lot of organic material. So in this video you'll see the solids that are moving through the drainage system. And again, the drainage system has to keep these solids moving, because if they start to build up in the system, they cause all sorts of problems. And so have a look at this video, and when you see the artificial drainage pipe, the artificial sewer pipe, you'll see that it's in a pit, and to access it, we'll have to drain down the pit below it. Now look at some of the material which is in that pit. It's unbelievable. But this is the material which the sewer has to transport right through the network to treatment, where it's removed. So often the first stage in the treatment process is to remove the bigger materials, the rags, etc. But again, I mean, the sewer system has to cope with this material all the time, and those bigger rag material are a big source of blockages in the sewer networks, which are an issue. So those videos are really just to give you a feel for what's happening inside sewers, combined sewers, certainly in the UK. So I hope you enjoy looking at them. And so this takes us on to this picture, which is a bit curious. So this picture is just to remind us that no matter how well the drainage system is designed, it is all about how people interact with it. So the best drainage system in the world, so it's no misaligned pipes, no infiltration, great velocities to keep things moving. It is about how people interact. So a big issue is not cows in sewers, because that's actually quite a rare occurrence, and I hope all ended well for this cow. But a big issue is how people interact with it. So there's been lots of surveys done, and I'm sure if you search online you'll find them, to look at the kind of things that people put down their kitchen sink and also down their WC in their houses. Everything from unwanted food to unwanted clothing items. In the past, when I've been in the sewer, you find things like pool balls, children's toys, pairs of glasses. So that's people who are being, either by mistake or maliciously are putting things, basically using their WC in their house as a some sort of bin. But as well as that, you also get, particularly in central areas, you get quite a lot of fats and oils in sewers going down as part of the cooking processes, either from commercial restaurants, which is a big issue, but also domestic properties. And once this gets into the sewer, it cools down, congeals, and it can cause blockages as well. So as well as the technical design of sewers, getting that right, it's also about how people interact with the sewer network as well, which is really difficult to predict. So how do we think about performance? So in the UK, not unlike other countries, water service provision is regulated, and this is to ensure customers get good value for money. So what this means is that the water service providers in the UK can't raise their bills for customers unless they can show service is improving. And this is partly because, of course, certainly in the UK anyway, there's only one water provider. There's no market for you to choose from. So you can't choose between two water providers in the same way you might choose between two phone companies, or in the UK you can choose between electricity and gas suppliers, although that's usually done purely on price. In the UK, you can't really choose between water supplier or your drainage services provider either. So they're quite heavily regulated, and what regulation does is it tries to improve performance, and it's only by improving performance can the bills be raised. So there's a big incentive there for companies to improve performance, because that gives them the ability to raise their bills, and that gives better return for their shareholders where they're privately owned. In Scotland, the water provider is called Scottish Water, and it's still owned by the state, if you like, largely, not entirely, largely. So, and in England and Wales, it's Ofwat, which regulates water service provision. So what they do is they set a number of performance targets for the companies to be measured against. And I've left the water supply ones in here because we are thinking of water supply in a few weeks' time. So just run through these quite quickly, and I'll give you an idea for really what people are expecting from the water service provider. So you don't want there to be, so the first one is quite obvious, you don't want there to be interruptions to supply. So when you wake up in the morning, you want to be able to turn your tap and water to come out. So they're penalised quite heavily for interruptions to supply, particularly where the interruption to supply is not planned. So there'll always be times where perhaps for a short period of time the supply has to be shut off, although largely in well-designed systems that's not needed apart from very small areas, but it's where unplanned things happen, and that perhaps suggests poor maintenance of equipment, etc., where they're quite heavily penalised. Sewer flooding, that's either the number of internal flooding incidents per year, so that's where there's flooding inside a property, or the number of external incidents per year, so flooding outside the property from the sewer apparatus. And there a distinction is made between flooding which is due to routine rainfall and flooding which is due to exceptional rainfall. So obviously if you get the worst storm in living memory, there's lots of things happening there, and it may not be surprising that your sewerage system floods because that flow event may be much higher than the system was ever designed for, or people could even expect it to be designed for. But where you're getting flooding due to quite routine rainfall events, then people are perfectly entitled to be concerned about that. Water supply leakage. There's big problems with water supply infrastructure right across the world because some of it is quite old, and because of that leaks can occur in water supply. The issue here is that where you've got quite long networks, hundreds or thousands of kilometres of pipes, it can be quite difficult often to find the individual leaks. In the past, certainly in Scotland, I know that in Glasgow, it was always easier, rather than finding leaks, it was always easier to increase supply into the network. So in Glasgow specifically, that's what they did. They thought, well, we can either go out and find all these leaks, or we can just create a bigger water treatment works and we can pump even more water into the network, and that should solve the problem, and people still have a supply of water. And I think in maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, leakage rate in Glasgow was around 50%, which is quite incredible. But when they built the new water treatment works, it was agreed by the regulator actually that new treatment works had to be exactly the same capacity as the old one. So any increased demand through population growth, commercial growth, or people just using water in different ways, more of it, had to be met by reducing leakage, and that's a strategy that's worked. So leakage rates in Glasgow now have come down, so it means that even though the treatment works isn't any bigger, it's coping with that change in demand. Water companies are also encouraged to encourage their customers to use less water by using water saving devices, low water use taps, showers, etc. Water supply outages, and then water mains repairs. So that's bursts per 100 kilometres of pipeline, and sewer collapses per 1,000 kilometres of pipeline. So what you could see is that really for sewerage systems, really the main criteria are collapses to the pipe network, and also the flooding incidents that we're concerned around. Now, on the left here, what I've got is for a range of companies. I've got some of the parameters mapped up here for flooding. Now, really, I don't want to get into detail of what this data shows, but the point I want to make is that when you're presented with a graph like this, your temptation is to compare these and perhaps draw the conclusion that Yorkshire Water is the worst in terms of flooding. But it can be quite difficult to make those comparisons because different water companies are faced with different challenges. So a good example is if we compare Thames Water, which is delivering water to London, really high density population there. So that means there's lots of people there, so if there is a flood, lots of people might be affected. But the other issue they have in London is a lot of the city is built on clay, and it expands and contracts as it saturates and becomes dry, and that causes lots of problems for pipe networks because that tends to pull them in and out of their joints, which has caused issues both for water supply and for drainage. If you come to a place like Scotland, where 80% of the population, say, lives in cities, the other 20% of the city of the population lives in rural areas, it really stretches a company to be able to operate in a way that meets the demands of cities, but also is able to provide a really good service to rural areas as well. So what I'm trying to say is all these different companies will have different asset bases in terms of the kind of infrastructure they have to maintain, different customer demographics, in terms of the socioeconomic backgrounds, etc., level of economic activity, the types of developments, and also different geographical challenges as well. Some of them will have long water supply and drainage pipe networks serving, connecting treatment works to the city, and then the sewage system to a sewage treatment works, and others will be much more compact. So it's difficult to make those comparisons. But on the right, what's there is, this is for up to 1718, number of properties which were internally flooded by sewage was 3,700, external flooding 25,000. Now, within a UK context, 3,700 properties flooded by sewage is actually really significant. There's no flood event in recent years, as far as I can remember anyway, that's flooded that number of properties. So there's no river that's flooded, or sea defence that's overtopped that's flooded that number of properties in the UK. But if it had been, it would have been front page news for a long time. But the problem with sewage systems is that quite often the failures are quite small, and they might only affect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 houses, a handful of houses. So it tends to be drip drip, and it's never really newsworthy, and the water company just gets on with trying to improve their network for those individual customers. But if there was to be a major flooding event which affected this number of people, once every 10 years, it'd be massive news. There'd be reviews, there'd be commissions brought together to try and solve the problem. But with the drainage system, I'm not saying people don't care about it. It's just because it's lots of individual events, and the reasons behind them can all be different as well. A lot of those individual property failures, a lot of those failures would have been due to blockages to networks, and a lot of those blockages would have been due to people putting things down a WC that perhaps they shouldn't have put down there. Okay, so this is for Scotland, and in Scotland the water regulation is not undertaken by Ofwat, it's undertaken by the Water Industry Commissioner for Scotland, and they operate a similar system to Ofwat, and there has been some comparisons done between English water companies and Scottish Water. So these are the criteria which have to be met in Scotland, and each of these are scored, and you can see there the maximum score that Scottish Water can obtain is 418.75, very accurate. Precise, sorry. What happens is each of these activities is scored each year, and the Commissioner expects the score to be at 380 or better for their performance to be considered to be acceptable. Now, the difference in Scotland, of course, is that the Scottish Water is still publicly owned. It's a state-owned water company, which, with a few exceptions, supplies all the commercial and residential properties in Scotland. So it's not quite as simple as England in terms of setting price, because this means that there's a political involvement in setting the price in Scotland. So any rise in water bills in Scotland also needs political approval to some extent. I'm not saying that the Scottish Government dictates the price of water in Scotland, far from it, but they're a key stakeholder because it's publicly owned and in setting that price at the right level. So there is that political dimension to it, and I don't think that's unusual in other countries, to be honest. So I'm not critical of that. And I think some of the work that has been done, I think when Scottish Water was first formed back in the 90s, its performance was certainly lagging behind water companies in the rest of the UK, and we didn't compare well at all. Although, bearing in mind what I said about comparing between water companies. But I think it's fair to say now that in Scotland, whilst Scottish Water is not better than the best English water service providers, I think it's certainly better than the average. And so that's both in terms of technical performance and also in terms of the customer services, which is a big issue, because that's how customers interface with the company. Do they pick up the phone in time? Do they answer queries acceptably, etc. So I think, although it's publicly owned, I think the improvements we've seen in Scotland have been. So being publicly owned, of course, means that perhaps at times there'll be less money available from the state to invest in it, if that was to be needed, even though it's funded by bill payments, so the state provision is not an issue. But there is that level of political interference. But despite that, I think it's true to say that the level of service in Scotland is increased at a rate faster than the rest of the UK. If you're interested, that's a bit of a generalisation. It may be worth you doing research on that to see whether or not you feel that's correct. And I'd also be interested I've spent a lot of time here speaking about English water companies, the rest of UK water companies compared to Scottish Water. But I'm interested to see what people think, in terms of water companies from outside the UK, European ones and ones from elsewhere, how they compare with the UK water companies. So flooding is a big driver for what we do in urban drainage, and for a long time that's pretty much all we thought about. This picture here shows a street in Glasgow, and what you can see is we have these kind of fountains on the road. There's one just in front of the red car on the left, and there's one further down the road in the picture. And what's happening here is that there's so much flow in the sewerage network. Not only can the rainfall runoff, which is in the picture, can it not get in the network, the water's basically bursting out of the network as well. So underneath that little fountain there will be a manhole, and the water will be lifting the manhole cover, which is quite a feat in itself, and basically it's jetting it around the edges and through the manhole key slots often as well. Eventually the pressure's so great it can lift the manhole cover right off. Often manhole covers are jammed down because there have been so many vehicles that went over them. Sometimes they get jammed down. If that happens, it's not unusual for the water just to lift the manhole and the assembly out of the road, and you left a big hole in the road, which causes you another problem you have to deal with. But as well as those big dramatic floods we get from urban drainage systems, as I said earlier, a lot of the problems are just about quite mundane events where individual properties or individual gardens are flooded, and the impact of that can't be trivialised, particularly when sewage is involved. Often the worst cases are obviously where you have internal flooding. Here's another one here. The colour of that water, I think, says quite a lot. And this poor person here has lost their magazine collection, which for some reason they keep in their WC. So I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that both these WCs were in basements, and having a WC in your basement comes with its own challenges. So here we've got 3 houses, 1, 2 and 3, and you've got the one at the top of the hill that has no basement, so the chances of that house getting flooded either directly or indirectly by water from the sewerage system are relatively low. But then as you go down the hill, house number 2, you can see has a basement, and in that basement they've got some sort of fixture unit. Now the water up in which is the water, if the water level's here at this dotted line, you can see that's above the basement level of the house number 2. So essentially it means that the network has become pressurized, and the pressurized flow will look for a weak spot to release that pressure, and in a basement too often that pressure point will become the WC or the fixture unit. So it's not unusual for people to talk about sewage bubbling up through the WC or through their wash hand basin or through their baths and things like this, and it can be absolutely disgusting. If you speak to people who model sewerage systems, etc., there's two things they say. They would never live in a house, never live in a basement apartment, and they would never live in a house which has a driveway which slopes down from the road. And that's because when you have rainwater running down the road, when your road becomes overloaded because it's really heavy rainfall, again it looks for a weak spot, and too often it'll just go down your driveway and it'll flood your garage and it'll go into your house and all the rest of it. So that's the things they look for. So they know more about this than the average householder, so I trust their opinion on this. But basements are a particular issue. Now you can get these things here which are highlighted over on the right, basically non-return valves. And so what these do for basements is they allow flow to freely move from the fixture units in the basement under normal conditions. They'll freely go into the drainage system, but then when the flow level starts to build up in the drainage network, it basically closes it off. It means you can't use your WC during the flood event, which is perhaps a secondary concern, but it also means that you don't get this flooding coming into your property, which is quite an important consideration. Okay, so it's quite a lot of energy is involved sometimes, and like I say, it has to be released somewhere from the network, and this is the kind of things you see. Even quite small flows can mount up to over time and cause problems. Now, the alternative to flooding urban areas with sewage is these things here. So, like I was saying earlier, I was trying to say that where flooding happens, it's like there's a lot of pressure on the system and it has to find somewhere to release, and that might be in someone's basement, or it might be popping a manhole cover off in a street. And that comes with lots of disruption and obviously pollution, health risks, and all the rest of it. So this thing here is the alternative to this. So rather than having the sewage system decide where it's going to release that excess flow around, and you trying to predict where that is, and trying to deal with it afterwards, as engineers a few years ago, we'll go back some time, we started installing these things called combined sewer overflows. And what this is the engineering deciding where, when the system's overloaded, where it's going to release that excess flow, and it releases it into rivers or other water courses. Now, so the good news, if you like, is that when this happens, it's during rainfall events. So it means that predominantly it's rainfall that's getting released into the environment. So it's not raw sewage. But the bad news is that still around 5 or 10% of the flow when this happens will be raw sewage, and that's going into the environment, and that has quite a significant negative impact on the environment. But the alternative to this is that streets and homes get flooded, so it's not an easy situation. Now this approach to doing things is still really, really common, but it's now much less common than it was. To a certain extent, we have to live within budgets, etc. So to a certain extent it's unavoidable, but over my time since I've graduated as a student, over 20 years or so, there's been billions of pounds in the UK spent to reduce the number of these. which is a good thing. But they're not unusual. This is this one here is in Stockbridge in Edinburgh. One of the issues you have is where when you do get discharges during rainfall events, is there's lots of solid material, fecal matter, food waste, etc. in the flow, and as well as that, there's toilet paper and all the rest of it. Cotton buds, people still put cotton buds down RWC, and that material tends to get caught up on trees and vegetation, etc. So when the flow subsides, you're still left with a lot of this sort of sewer CSO litter lying around, and often it's at quite a high level because the CSO's discharge has happened during a flood event, and it can be quite visible. So the other way, the other way of reducing, of thinking about this, is to say, well, the combined sewer has been overloaded with rainfall, so the rainfall and the sewage is mixing together. Why mix those flows together at all? Why not just collect the rainfall separately and manage the risk associated with that separately, and just have pipes only for foul flows? And so this is what we have here. We have the 3 ponds. It's actually 3 ponds and a basin. So the basin's here. So a basin is basically a pond which is dry when it's not raining. These collect the flow. So rather than it going into a pipe network, they're collected in these ponds, and these ponds discharge to a river. So it's still doing what the CSO did. It's still discharging the excess flow into a river, but it's not combining it with raw sewage when it does it. So it's, you can see the advantage there. So this list here just goes through some of the things we expect from drainage systems, and I think I've been through most of them already. So this is the final slide here. I think this is covered already on vision. If you're interested in doing this course, I would advise you to have a look at the course textbook, Urban Drainage, by David Butler and his chums. It's actually quite a good book. There's quite a few copies of it in the library, and they are also available as an ebook for people who are studying online, or if you're studying at home or whatever. You should be able to access it there. There's different versions of the book available in the library, but the most recent one is the 4th edition. What I would say is that if you plan to work in urban drainage when you graduate, either all you do or part of what you do, it is worth spending the 40 quid on the book. I know 40 quid is quite a lot of money, it certainly is for me, but it's worth spending that 40 quid on the book because it is quite a good book. It's not perfect, but it is quite a good book. I find it quite readable, and things are explained in quite a good way. So if you do have the 40 quid and you want to get a good mark for this course, or if you want to work in this area when you graduate, or perhaps both, let's be positive, it's worth thinking about buying it. If you can't afford the 40 quid, and 40 quid is a lot of money, there should be a few copies in the library for people, so that's not an issue either. So this is maybe worth touching on a sort of key point actually, is that I'll cover most things in the class. If you pay attention to all my lectures, there's no doubt you'll be able to get an A in the exam, and we'll all be really happy. But I think to do really well, if you want to get 100% in the exam, it's worth reading around the subject. So there's this book, which the bulk of material in the course is in this book. I'll also put stuff on vision from time to time, but I also expect you to read around the subject a little bit as well. So it's not like I say, you can get by just by coming along to my lectures or watching these videos. I'm sure you'll do really well. But to really understand the subject, and to come to terms with the fundamentals of it, it's worth doing a little bit of reading. Both this book and elsewhere. Absolutely. Okay, so unless there's any question, so I'll just draw the lecture to a close here. If there's any questions, please just get in touch. There should be a discussion forum on Vision for you to post questions about this lecture and the other introductory lecture, or you can drop me an email, or I can see you in class, or we can Skype or whatever. Okay, bye for now.